In The Overexposed City, Paul Virilio asks, where does the city without gates begin? The answer to that question is a matter of perspective, a perspective we can't see by going into town, as Virilio shows us that we can no longer stand before a city and see for ourselves. For this perspective, we need to use a map. Here we are looking at the population density of the United States. The more intense yellow represents areas with more than 1,000 residents per square mile. We can see that the Northeast is the most densely populated area in the United States. However, if we change the scale to show areas with more than 10,000 residents per square mile, we only see a small cluster in the Northeast, New York. Let's zoom into the most densely populated county in the country, New York County. New York County, represented here in yellow, is the only county with more than 50,000 residents per square mile. Now let's zoom into Manhattan Island. When people think of New York City, they are often envisioning Manhattan. New York residents often refer to Manhattan as the city. It has been described as the cultural, financial, media, and entertainment capital of the world. Manhattan is the home to the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, advertising on Madison Avenue, and the headquarters of all 4 major American broadcast networks. This density of people and opportunity creates some of the most expensive real estate in the world. We can see that New York County is most densely populated in the Upper East and West Side of Manhattan. But we also see an anomaly, a giant rectangle where there is no population. Well, when you have a city this densely packed with people, you need a place for recreation. Central Park. Central Park is an urban park located between the Upper West and Upper East sides of Manhattan. It was the first landscape public park in the United States. A group of wealthy merchants and landowners advocated for the creation of public grounds that were similar to London and Paris on the basis that New York needed a comparable park to establish its international reputation. Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux designed the park to bring together people from all social backgrounds. The People's Park, as they called it, was intended to help build diverse communities in a democratic space where people could enjoy recreation as well as artistic and cultural events. Cartographically, its north border also serves as a boundary between Harlem and Manhattan. This border is known as the Gateway to Harlem. But there's more to this gateway than simply serving as a boundary between Harlem and Manhattan. It's also a metaphorical gateway to opportunity and class mobility. Let's go back to our map and look at how Manhattan and Harlem compare across different data points. First, let's look at class mobility. In this map, the census tracts are colored by class mobility, or the fraction of children who grew up in this area who have average household income in the top 20% of the national income distribution for children born in this same year. The more intense yellow represents higher level of class mobility. So we can see that there's a very high level of class mobility around Central Park. But if we draw the border at the Gateway to Harlem, we see that those above the line have far less class mobility than those below. As we mentioned before, Manhattan has the highest population density in the United States, but it also has the highest density of jobs. Here we're looking at each census tract colored by density of jobs in 2013. The bright yellow area in Midtown Manhattan represents census tracts with over 500,000 jobs per square mile. The people living here enjoy some of the highest wages in the country. Here we are looking at median household income between 2012 and 2016 by census tract. The brighter yellow areas have median household incomes of over $175,000. Again, we can draw the border to represent the Gateway to Harlem, and we see drastically different levels of income. The people that make the most tend to live closest to the opportunities in Manhattan. Those living closest to Midtown Manhattan are much more likely to have a short commute time and more access to the opportunities provided by an area with such density of jobs. The bright yellow area in Midtown Manhattan represents the highest proportion of residents with short commutes. Over 35% of the residents here have less than a 15-minute commute to work, which means these people are primarily working in Midtown Manhattan. However, this access to opportunity comes at a price: expensive rent. Manhattan commands some of the highest rent in the world. Median rent in Midtown exceeds $3,000 per month. If we add back the border to indicate the gateway to Harlem, we can see just how much more expensive it is to live in Manhattan. Median rents in Manhattan easily triple rent in Harlem. The problem here is now apparent. If you can't afford to live in Manhattan, you are outside the gateway to opportunity and class mobility. Virilio asked, where does the city without gates begin? Using maps and data, we can now see where Manhattan begins, at the gateway to Harlem. This represents a metaphorical gateway to class mobility between Manhattan and Harlem. Paul Ricoeur says that resemblances allow us to bring together what once was distant. Maps and data allow us to see the divide. In this case, urban planning and architecture literally define boundaries around class mobility. In The Death and Life of Great American Cities, Jane Jacob argues that for cities to create effective economic pools of use, there needs to be a sufficient density of inhabitants. However, Jacobs warned that when densities get to the point that they discourage diversity, it will be fatal to a city. This is because diversity in age and types of buildings has a direct connection with diversity of population and industry. In Manhattan, this densification of people and jobs has created a divide, a gateway that we can see on a map across multiple different data elements. To put it simply, Manhattan is out of reach for all except the most affluent. And as Jacobs predicted, people are tired of living in Manhattan. New York County had already been losing population before COVID-19. From 2014 to 2018, there were 126,000 residents who left while only 100,000 new residents replaced them. This results in a net loss of 26,000 residents, which is the third highest loss in New York State. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the exodus from Manhattan. Let's look at New York taxi data as a proxy for activity in Manhattan. This animation shows the number of taxi pickups in New York County from July 2019 to June 2020. We can see a huge drop-off in pickups in March 2020 as people became aware of COVID-19. And we see taxi pickups drop as much as 90% in April 2020. But people aren't leaving just because of COVID-19. The Manhattan Institute recently surveyed those working in Manhattan. 46% of those surveyed consider relocating their residents outside of Manhattan over the past 4 months. And of those that were likely to relocate, 66% stated the cost of living was the biggest factor. Of those surveyed, 67% feel that working from home is the new normal for New Yorkers. So the question becomes, will Manhattan remain the center of industry, or has industry moved on to other options like remote work? Can cities like Manhattan survive the new normal? And if cities can survive, what can we do to help remove barriers to class mobility like we see in Manhattan?